Hi, everybody. So I'm Barry Margulies from the Department of Biology, and I'm going to talk about some course redesign for the pandemic. I want to talk first about what cures were, and this is a course that I taught for the first time. It was taught in spring of 2020, so it happened right during our pandemic shutdown. Cures are course-based undergrad research experiences, so basically they're project labs that are hands-on, and the HHMI has funded us for these labs, and they're really built around trying to build equity in education, teach students resilience, and work in labs where the answers really are unknown to both the instructor and the students. So you work together in developing hypotheses, and that's analysis level, which is higher level Bloom's level. The students design experiments and then run them with a little bit of guidance, but even then, the instructor, I still don't know what the outcomes would be. The students are supposed to interpret the data, even messy data. That would be the analytic part, and unfortunately, we never got to that. We got to some of the creation of the reagents, but we never got to the second half of the course. And then the synthetic part, where they really get to work, is to design and execute new experiments. So the original assessment plan dealt with quizzes and exams, which were simply recall and some analytic work. And the real rubber meets the road part of the class was going to be a poster session at the end, after they used all the tools that we taught them, and they were going to analyze their data, and they were going to show some synthesis of new ideas and potentially new experiments and new hypotheses when they were finished. Well, the shutdown came, which meant that I had to keep the objectives of the class in mind for the redesign. I had to keep both the objectives that were for less tangible skills like resilience, and I also had to keep in mind what the basic skills were, the actual techniques I wanted the students to know. So I had to use similar pedagogic principles that I went into the class in the beginning with, and make sure that that new plan still centered around equity, accessibility, and availability. The availability, of course, was a big issue in the ability of students to get online, to participate in any of the live sessions that I held. And even then, I tried to make myself even more available for office hours and for consultations with students along the way. And we'll talk about that in a moment. The real thing I did here that really kept the objectives of the class and the goals of the class in mind was to change the major assessment at the end from being a poster session to being a writing assignment. Again, students would still be able to do analysis and synthesis, and that writing assignment was a grant proposal. So the grant proposal was provided with a group of instructions. I wrote a very detailed set of instructions in PDFs, which we'll see in a moment. I recorded me talking about the individual things, and during those recordings, I had the PDFs up, and I also drew a number of things with the document camera and recorded all those things and posted them for students to watch. Plus, I had a regular session live that I recorded in Panopto with their questions. And I also offered a lot of Zoom sessions for individual consultations. And trust me, I did a boatload of those. Sometimes 4 or 5 students in a day for an hour at a time. So it took a lot of time to be there for those personal consultations. It's not something I could have done with a much bigger class. These are the explicit instructions, what I call the basics, the written instructions for the grant proposal. These are not all of them. This is a segment out of them, but I wanted to show you this to show you the PDF and break it down. The stuff in blue here, these are all sort of the nuts and bolts and the mechanics of the structure. And students had to abide by these things, just like we do when we write grant proposals. And then there was the content section here in red. And the content section here shows you what each piece is supposed to be. The abstract, the specific aims, the background and significance. And when students put the two things together in the written instructions, they could come up with a full grant proposal. I also wrote a rubric, and this is a sample section of the rubric. The rubric actually had 14 individual items here, the criteria on the left side. And I wrote very explicit instructions here as well and showed this to the students and posted it online for them so they could see what they were going to be graded on and how they were going to be graded. So it was very clear to them exactly what I wanted to see in the excellent to good category for every single piece. So for example, in the research plan and the rationale, I wanted them to do exactly what's written there. And if there were shortcomings, they could see the grade that would occur because of it. Now, The rubric was really useful because rubrics allowed me to do very rapid reading and scoring. I could take a 10 or 12 page lengthy document, parse it based on the rubric, and actually grade the entire thing in maybe 15 to 20 minutes. And what else was important was, because this was the final thing in the semester, it happened after the final teachable moment. So it meant that I could go through these documents very quickly, very fast, and wind up with a final score for each student. The last thing I want to mention is when you look at the final score, by now you should already have an idea of what an A paper or an A proposal looks like, a B, a C, a D. And if your scores in the rubric in the final sum come out to be about where you expected them to be, then you're great. And if they don't, then you should go back and relook at your rubric and see where you need to adjust the student score. I don't want to say to gift them points or to take away points, but to more honestly look at what the details were in the grading so that you can go back in and make the proper adjustments so that the paper fits exactly what you thought it should fit. Thank you for your time.